All stories have a beginning somewhere, and mine has a history. Its short history is this. A British folkteller named Mike Rust told it in England, and it was heard by an American storyteller named Dan Ketting. And Mike gave the story to Dan, from whom I got it. But the story itself, it goes way back. It goes back to the time when Arthur was king of England. You know Arthur. He had a magician, a wizard named... you knew that. But I bet you didn't know that Merlin had 3 sons. And they were the most ill-favored young men ever. To call them ugly is to insult ugly people. But Merlin didn't see that. And when it was time for his sons to marry, why, he got them the most beautiful young ladies that he could find. But when those lovely, well-bred ladies caught sight of those horrendously ill-favored sons, they refused to wed. And Merlin grew angry and mad and had them dragged up to the top of a bluff overlooking the Cornish coast. And there he turned them into stones. 3 of them. Tall, gray, standing stones. And there they would stand for all eternity looking out across the ocean and being buffeted by the rain and the wind. He was a great magician, but there was a little flaw in his spell. For most of the year, the stones stood there like the rocks they were. But on one night, they moved. On All Hallows Eve, they could leave and walk down to the ocean, and there they became beautiful young girls again, and there all night long they washed and scrubbed and washed, trying to get the stone out of their flesh. But they were never successful, and every year when dawn came up on All Hallows, they turned back to stone and moved back up to the bluff and stood there looking out over the ocean. And this story was told from generation to generation and from century to century, clear down into our own time. In the last century, close to our own time, a man came back to the village behind the standing stones. His wife had died, and he wanted his son, now a young man, to find something about his heritage, for the man himself had grown up in that village. Oh, the grandparents were excited. Oh, yes, they would show him the sights. They would tell him the stories. They would point out every rock and every ruin. They loved it. You can imagine. Now, on All Hallows Eve, they were sitting around the hearth, and the talk turned to those 3 standing stones. And the grandparents told the story. But when they came to the end of the story, they said, "And tonight is the night they move, but you must not go out to watch them. You must not go anywhere close to there, because if you see them move, you are doomed to death or worse." "Oh, come on," said the father. "Giving him a little legend, and that's all right, but superstition, that's just a story storytellers tell. And who can believe a storyteller?" "It's true," they said. It's true. And they became agitated about it. And he said, "Well, look here." He said, "I'll go myself tonight, and I'll look and see those stones standing there where they're supposed to be, because they're rocks, you know." He said, I'll just check it out, and I'll let you know." "Oh, no, he mustn't do that." And they were so upset and so agitated that finally he said, all right. But you know I'm right." And he went to bed. They all went to bed. Along towards morning, the boy woke up and he felt that something was wrong. And his father's bed was empty. He knew. He ran through the early morning mist to the sea. He looked down from the bluff, and there where the Atlantic waves crashed against the shore, and the foam surged around a still, dark figure. The figure of his drowned father. He looked to his side to see the stones where they always were. There was one, there was another. And there was the third moving into place as he watched. When he told his grandparents what he had seen, they sent him away to school, inland, far from the sea. He went to school, he went to university, he got a job, he worked. He took his vacations in the mountains. But when he was an old man, ready to retire, he thought to himself, all my life, I've dreamed about the sea. Why is it I have never gone to the shore? Could I have really seen what I thought I saw on a dim and morning when I was emotionally upset and everything so long ago? I've lived my whole life because of a story a storyteller told. And who can believe what a storyteller says? So he decided he would retire to a house by the sea. And he went online and found the perfect house, a hacienda in Mexico. He sent his things across the ocean. He flew across, he took trains, he took buses, he took taxis, and finally he was walking up to this house. He could smell the sea air. Made him feel young. He could hardly wait to see the sea after all these years. He left the unpacking and ran out on the veranda. Ahead, there was a garden. There was the sound of seagulls, but at the end of the garden there was a hedge and he couldn't see the actual shore. So he had to go down through the garden to a gap in the hedge, and he stepped through, and there in front of him the Pacific Ocean crashed against the shore, and the foam from the surf swirled around the dark feet of 3 standing stones. He was back through the hedge before he even thought about it. I'm hallucinating, he thought. It's the travel and the stress and seeing the ocean again. He thought, I must look and be sure that what I saw wasn't really there. So he stepped through the hedge, and there were no standing stones by the edge of the sea. They had moved. They were right beside the hedge. So he turned, and he began to walk with some haste up through the garden. And when he was about halfway up the garden, he looked back over his shoulder, and the stones were on his side of the hedge. He ran up to the veranda and turned and looked, and the stones were standing in the very middle of the garden. You're not real, he said. But you move when I'm not looking. I'm not going to take my eyes off you. And he sat and stared at the 3 stones. The stones stood there. They were just rocks. They were tall, gray, foreign-looking rocks. It appeared that they had stood in that garden for centuries. And he stared at them, and he stared at them. And it had been a long trip, and the air was warm, and the stones didn't move. And before he knew it, his eyes closed, his head fell down on his chest, and then he woke. The stones were right in front of him. They couldn't be real. He stood up He leaned closer. He looked at the surface of them as if there was a clue there, and the nearest stone touched him. Now, if you like, you can go to a very friendly little village in Mexico, and there you will find there is a lovely hacienda for rent. And you can rent it. And you will find it has a fine veranda, a beautiful garden, a lovely hedge, and a private beach with the ocean rolling up on the other side of it. The veranda has a very peculiar decoration. On the veranda there stands a stone. It is of some unknown rock. It is gray and narrow and tall. It looks like it's been there for centuries. Now, in that village, the storytellers tell you that stone is actually an old man, and that on All Hallows Eve, he leaves the veranda and goes down to the sea, and there he turns back into an old man, and all night long he washes and washes and washes to try to get the stone out of his flesh, but he never can. And that at the dawn of every All Hallows Day, he must go back and resume his form as a stone on the veranda. And the storytellers say that if you happen to see him move, you are doomed to death, or worse. But who can believe a storyteller?